May 27, 1942, the basement of the old administrative building, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Lieutenant Commander Thomas Dyer stared at the columns of 5-digit number sequences spread across his desk, his eyes burning from yet another marathon shift in the windowless chamber that housed Station HYPO. The benzodrine tablets kept him alert, but they couldn't ease the crushing weight of responsibility pressing on every decision. The pencil in his hand quivered slightly as he added another notation to the worksheet before him. Beside him, towers of IBM punch cards loomed like monuments to months of painstaking labor. Each card represented hours of analysis, countless cross-references, and the combined knowledge of a team pushed to the edge of human endurance. Everything hinged on the meaning of these numbers. The war, the Pacific Fleet, thousands of American lives hanging in the balance. He reached for another punch card from the stack beside him, matching code groups against patterns his team had meticulously assembled over 6 grueling months. 3 floors above, Admiral Chester Nimitz waited in the war room for an answer that could decide whether he risked his remaining 3 aircraft carriers against a Japanese armada that outnumbered him in every class of ship. The stakes were monumental. After Pearl Harbor, after months of defeats across the Pacific, this could be America's only chance to halt Japanese expansion. One mistake, one misread code, one faulty assumption, and the Pacific War could be lost before summer ended. Deer's fingers moved across the IBM card sorter, hunting for a pattern that might reveal the enemy's intentions. His colleague, Commander Joseph Rochefort, stood nearby in his familiar bathrobe and slippers, having barely left the underground bunker for days. The attire was practical, not eccentric. The basement was suffocating, poorly ventilated, and the heat from the IBM machines made standard uniforms unbearable. In this cramped, sweaty workspace, results mattered far more than military decorum, where the fate of nations was decided by men hunched over code sheets and punch cards. Neither man knew that in the coming week, their work would alter the course of World War II. Intercepts were clear. The Imperial Japanese Navy was planning its largest operation since Pearl Harbor. 4 fleet carriers, dozens of supporting warships, and hundreds of the world's most skilled naval aviators were converging on a target identified by 2 letters in the Japanese code, AF. The question that haunted every man in that basement was simple yet devastating. What was AF? Where would the Japanese strike next? One miscalculation, and America could lose the Pacific War before summer ended. The mathematics of disaster were stark. Japan possessed 10 fleet carriers. America had only 3 remaining in the Pacific, and one, Yorktown, was badly damaged from the Battle of the Coral Sea just weeks earlier. If Nimitz positioned his carriers incorrectly, if Station HYPO's analysis failed, the Japanese could accomplish what Pearl Harbor had not: the total annihilation of American naval power in the Pacific. The transformation had begun 6 months prior on a morning that would forever change both nations. December 7, 1941, dawned bright and calm over the Hawaiian Islands. Families prepared for church, while sailors aboard battleships moored at Pearl Harbor ate breakfast or caught a few extra hours of sleep on what should have been a quiet Sunday. The Pacific Fleet rested at anchor, powerful yet complacent, unaware that catastrophe was moments away. At 7:55 a.m., the peace ended. Japanese aircraft attacked Pearl Harbor in 2 devastating waves. The strike had been orchestrated with meticulous precision by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, a brilliant strategist who understood both Japan's temporary advantage and America's industrial potential. His aim was simple: destroy the Pacific Fleet before the U.S. could mobilize its vast resources, give Japan 6 months to a year to consolidate its Pacific and Southeast Asian conquests, and then negotiate peace from a position of strength. Within 2 hours, the devastation was staggering. 8 battleships were sunk or damaged. The USS Arizona exploded with such force that over 1,100 men perished instantly, entombed forever in their ship. A 1,800-pound armor-piercing bomb penetrated the forward magazine, triggering an explosion so massive it lifted the 30,000-ton warship out of the water. Witnesses aboard other ships would never forget Arizona rising, breaking apart, and settling into the harbor bottom in under 9 minutes. The USS Oklahoma capsized after torpedo hits opened massive holes in her port side, trapping 429 sailors and Marines. Some survived in air pockets for days, their desperate pounding on the hull audible to rescue teams who could not reach them in time. The USS West Virginia sank with 106 crew members lost, though unlike Oklahoma and Arizona, she would later be raised, repaired, and return to service in major Pacific battles. On December 7th, she was yet another emblem of American vulnerability. Over 180 aircraft were destroyed on the ground, hangars and maintenance facilities demolished, and 2,403 Americans killed, Navy 2,008, Marine Corps 109, Army 218, civilians 68, with another 1,000 wounded, underscoring the totality of the devastation. The Pacific Fleet, America's main defense against Japanese expansion, lay in ruins. Admiral Husband Kimmel, commander of the Pacific Fleet, watched his ships burn through the windows of his headquarters, struggling to comprehend the scale of the catastrophe. A spent bullet shattered glass nearby. He picked up the deformed projectile, studied it for a long moment, then quietly told an aide that it would have been merciful had it killed him. Kimmel knew his career was effectively over. He would bear the burden of America's greatest military disaster. Within days, he would be relieved of command, replaced by Admiral Chester Nimitz. His request for a court-martial to clear his name would be denied. The blame for Pearl Harbor would shadow him for life. Yet, despite the devastation, the Japanese had missed the fleet's most crucial assets. All 3 Pacific Fleet carriers were absent that morning. Enterprise was returning from delivering aircraft to Wake Island, delayed by weather that, by providence, had saved it. Lexington was ferrying planes to Midway. Saratoga remained in dry dock on the west coast, undergoing maintenance. Aircraft carriers, not battleships, would ultimately decide the war, though few at the time realized this seismic shift in naval power. The age of the battleship as the dominant weapon was ending. The era of carrier warfare was beginning, and by fortune and Japanese miscalculation, America still retained its carriers. The Japanese also ignored Pearl Harbor's fuel storage tanks, vast repositories holding millions of gallons of oil essential to fleet operations. They bypassed repair facilities, dry docks, the submarine base, and naval yard infrastructure, assuming them irrelevant once the fleet was destroyed. They were catastrophically mistaken. These intact facilities would enable Pearl Harbor to serve as the staging ground for America's Pacific counteroffensive. Submarines stationed there would devastate Japanese merchant shipping, and repair yards would resurrect damaged ships, including some the Japanese believed sunk. Within months, Pearl Harbor would transform from a symbol of defeat into a hub of wartime activity. In that basement bunker at Pearl Harbor, Commander Joseph Rochefort faced an almost impossible mission. Station HYPO, the Navy's signals intelligence unit in Hawaii, had monitored Japanese communications for years, but with limited success. Officially Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, everyone referred to it as Station HYPO, using the phonetic code for H, standing for Hawaii, where one of the radio intercept towers was located. Before Pearl Harbor, they could decipher perhaps 10 to 15% of Japanese naval messages, and most only partially. It was sufficient to yield some intelligence, but nowhere near enough to predict major operations like the Pearl Harbor attack. The primary Japanese operational code, known to American cryptanalysts as JN25, contained roughly 30,000 to 33,000 5-digit groups in active use, each representing a word or phrase. The system's complexity was formidable. Each 5-digit group in the codebook corresponded to a specific word, phrase, or concept. To complicate decryption further, the Japanese applied super-enciphering using additive tables, essentially encrypting messages twice. First, the message was encoded with the codebook. Then, random 5-digit numbers from separate additive books were added to each group using non-carrying addition. The resulting message appeared as random numbers, resistant to frequency analysis or pattern recognition. Breaking this system required stripping away the additive layer mathematically, then painstakingly analyzing usage patterns across thousands of intercepted messages to determine each code group's meaning. Analysts had to identify which additive table had been applied, subtract it to reveal the original code groups, and then deduce their meaning. Complicating matters, the Japanese regularly changed both codebooks and additive tables, forcing analysts to start over repeatedly. Additive books contained 300 pages of 100 random 5-digit numbers each. To encrypt a message, the sender began at a specified page and line, adding successive numbers to each code group. The receiver, knowing the starting point, subtracted the same additives to retrieve the original code groups. For American analysts, identifying the correct additive book and starting point was the first challenge, sometimes determined through radio call signs or message indicators, other times requiring hundreds of trials. On December 1, 1941, just 6 days before Pearl Harbor, the Japanese switched to a new version of JN-25, designated JN-25B by American cryptanalysts. The new codebook and additive tables rendered all previously recovered code groups useless. Every additive recovery method developed might no longer work. Analysts were back at square one, staring at streams of 5-digit numbers that could have been hieroglyphics. Rochefort knew an attack was imminent somewhere. Traffic analysis, the study of communications patterns without reading messages, revealed rising Japanese naval activity, changing radio call signs, spiking message volume, and ship movements. Yet the Pearl Harbor strike force maintained complete radio silence during its voyage from Japan. 6 carriers and their escorts transmitted nothing, making tracking impossible. Departing Hitakapu Bay in the Kuril Islands on November 26th, the force took a northern route across the Pacific to avoid patrols, maintaining perfect communications discipline for 11 days. Not a single transmission revealed their location or intent, a profound intelligence failure. Cryptanalysts, traffic analysts, and intelligence officers had fragments of the puzzle but not the full picture. Some warnings reached Washington via diplomatic messages encoded in the Purple System, revealing growing tension but no operational details. The attack arrived as a complete and devastating surprise. Rochefort recognized that dwelling on failure would only invite further disaster. The only way forward was through Japanese communications. If Station HYPO could break JN-25B and read enough messages, they might decipher Japan's plans, preventing a repeat of Pearl Harbor and providing Admiral Nimitz with a crucial edge. Joseph John Rochefort, an unlikely candidate for such critical work, was born in Dayton, Ohio, on May 12, 1900. He enlisted in the Navy in 1918 at age 17, falsifying his birth year as 1898 to appear older and qualify for advancement, a discrepancy that persisted in his service records. He was commissioned as an ensign after graduating from the Navy's Steam Engineering School at Stevens Institute of Technology on June 14, 1919. His early career suggested little distinction, just another young officer progressing through the ranks. However, a fellow officer noticed something others overlooked. Rochefort had a talent for solving crossword puzzles and excelled at auction bridge, a complex card game requiring pattern recognition, memory, and logical deduction. These skills hinted at a mind capable of finding patterns in complexity and making inferences from incomplete data. The officer recommended Rochefort for the Navy's cryptanalysis program, a small, specialized field in desperate need of talent. In the early 1920s, naval cryptanalysis consisted of perhaps a dozen people working in cramped, underfunded offices, barely understood, trying to intercept and interpret communications from potential adversaries. Rochefort proved a natural, but he brought more than mathematical skill. In the mid-1920s, the Navy sent him to Japan for 3 years of language and cultural study from 1929 to 1932. During those years, Rochefort lived in Tokyo, studied Japanese at the Navy's language school, and immersed himself in Japanese culture. He didn't merely learn the language, he absorbed the mindset of the Japanese people, how they communicated, and how their military culture shaped decision-making. He understood concepts of honor, duty, and hierarchical communication. This cultural insight, combined with his cryptanalytic training, made him uniquely qualified to lead Station HYPO when war arrived. His deputy and chief cryptanalyst was Lieutenant Commander Thomas Dyer, a Naval Academy graduate trained under Agnes Driscoll, the legendary cryptanalyst who had pioneered the use of IBM punch card machines for code breaking. Driscoll, known across the cryptanalytic community as Miss Aggie, had been breaking codes since World War I. She trained many of the Navy's top cryptanalysts and achieved major breakthroughs against Japanese naval codes in the 1920s and 1930s. Her insight that IBM tabulating machines could be adapted for code breaking revolutionized the field. Dyer had been stationed at Pearl Harbor since 1936, longer than anyone else in the unit. He had an encyclopedic memory for code groups and an almost uncanny ability to spot patterns in seemingly random numbers. He could look at a partially decoded message and intuit the meaning of missing code groups based on context and recurring usage patterns from other messages. Leading up to Midway, Dyer often worked long shifts, aided by benzodrine tablets to maintain alertness. Amphetamines were standard issue for personnel performing critical assignments requiring extended wakefulness. "I figured there were people out there getting shot at," Dyer later explained. "If it happened to harm my health in the long run, so what?" Colleagues joked that his desk sign was accurate. "You don't have to be crazy to work here, but it helps." The sign, visible to anyone entering the cryptanalysis section, perfectly captured the reality of the work. The cryptanalysis section was, by military standards, a strange place. Officers wore bathrobes and slippers when the heat became unbearable in the basement facility. IBM machines generated enormous heat, and the basement's poor ventilation made standard uniforms impractical during marathon work sessions. Formal discipline gave way to results. Rank mattered less than analytical skill. Rochefort cultivated an environment where junior officers could challenge senior officers if the analysis demanded it, and breakthroughs were credited to the team rather than individuals. "We can accomplish anything provided no one cares who gets the credit," Rochefort often said. This philosophy was revolutionary in a military hierarchy where rank and personal recognition were paramount. But Rochefort understood that cracking JN-25 required collaboration, the exchange of ideas, and the willingness to question assumptions. Regardless of rank, a junior radio operator might notice a pattern missed by a senior officer. A linguist could provide context to help cryptanalysts interpret partially decoded messages. Every insight mattered. This collaborative culture would prove vital when pressure peaked in the spring of 1942. The linguistics section was led by Marine Captain Alva Laswell, who had studied Japanese for 3 years in Tokyo as part of the same exchange program that trained Rochefort. During the Midway period, Laswell was promoted to major on April 29, 1942, though many accounts continued to refer to him by his previous rank. He worked alongside 5 other linguists, the Navy's top Japanese language specialists. Their job was to translate decryptable portions of messages and provide context for intelligence analysts to determine operational meaning. A partially decoded message mentioning carriers, aircraft, and fuel could indicate a routine exercise or a major impending operation. Linguists supplied the cultural and linguistic perspective that allowed cryptanalysts to distinguish between ordinary communications and critical intelligence. The Traffic Analysis section, led by Lieutenant Commanders Thomas Huckins and John Williams, focused on message patterns rather than content. They tracked which stations communicated, monitored traffic volume, analyzed priority codes, and mapped communication patterns that could reveal operational plans, even when the messages themselves remained encrypted. Traffic analysis could warn of major operations days or weeks before cryptanalysts could decipher enough content. Increases in message traffic between carrier divisions and supply units might signal a forthcoming sortie. Changes in radio call signs often preceded major operations, and sudden radio silence could indicate that a carrier division was underway for combat. This small team, working in a windowless basement with limited equipment and overwhelming workloads, would soon face the most crucial intelligence challenge in American history. The work was painstakingly slow. Each intercepted message arrived as a string of 5-digit groups captured by radio stations across the Pacific. Operators in Hawaii, Australia, and elsewhere monitored Japanese naval frequencies 24 hours a day, transcribing every signal and forwarding them to Station HYPO. Cryptanalysts first had to remove the additive encryption mathematically. The Japanese used additive tables, adding another 5-digit number to each code group using non-carrying addition. For example, if a code group was 12345 and the additive 67890, the encrypted result would be 79135, adding each digit separately without carrying. Decryption required identifying the correct additive table for each message, then subtracting it to reveal the original code group. This process alone could take hours per message. Analysts maintained extensive files of recovered additives organized by date and radio circuit, looking for patterns in Japanese usage. Once the original code groups were recovered, the real challenge began. Cryptanalysts maintained massive card catalogs, compiling years of accumulated knowledge about each 5-digit number. They made educated guesses based on context, comparing occurrences across messages and gradually building toward certainty. A code group appearing frequently in carrier communications might mean aircraft, aviation fuel, or flight operations. One appearing in logistics messages might mean fuel, supplies, or ammunition. IBM punch card machines helped sort thousands of messages to identify patterns, but analysis required human intuition. Analysts had to interpret results, recognize meaningful patterns, and make logical leaps based on incomplete data. It was detective work of the highest order, combining mathematical precision, linguistic skill, cultural knowledge, and creative reasoning. By March 1942, Station HYPO had made sufficient progress on JN-25 to provide actionable intelligence on Japanese operations. The breakthrough was gradual, built from months of relentless effort. Each recovered code group made subsequent messages slightly clearer. Each additive pattern identified accelerated decryption. Slowly, painstakingly, the opacity of Japanese communications began to yield. Station HYPO contributed intelligence to the Battle of the Coral Sea in early May, helping the U.S. Navy locate Japanese carriers and achieve a tactical draw that halted Japan's advance toward Australia. Coral Sea was significant for multiple reasons. It was the first naval battle in history where opposing ships never sighted each other. All combat was conducted by aircraft. It proved that American carriers and pilots could engage effectively with Japan's seasoned carrier forces and damaged 2 Japanese carriers, Shokaku and Zuikaku, sidelining them for the next major operation. Yet the work remained frustratingly incomplete. Even at its peak, analysts could read only 30–40% of any given message. Many messages remained entirely opaque. The Japanese continued to rotate codebooks and additive tables, forcing constant adaptation, and the pressure on Station HYPO was relentless. Every intercepted message could contain intelligence that might save American lives or prevent another catastrophe. Every hour spent on a fruitless message was an hour lost that could have been devoted to more promising leads. The cryptanalysts understood that their success, or failure, would be measured in human lives. Then, in mid-May, they began picking up signals hinting at a massive operation. Traffic volume surged dramatically. Messages zipped between the combined fleet headquarters, carrier divisions, submarine squadrons, battleship units, and invasion forces. Everything pointed toward a major offensive slated for early June. Japanese operational security remained tight, yet they still had to communicate to coordinate an operation involving dozens of ships spread across thousands of miles of ocean. Each message, even if only partially readable, added another piece to the puzzle. The target was designated AF in the Japanese location code system. Station HYPO believed AF referred to Midway Island, a tiny atoll roughly 1,300 miles northwest of Hawaii that hosted a small but strategically crucial American air base. Midway consisted of 2 small islands, Sand Island and Eastern Island, encircled by a coral reef. The atoll measured just over 2 miles across, but its position made it vital. If Japan seized Midway, They could threaten Hawaii directly and establish a base to disrupt American communications across the Central Pacific. More critically, an assault on Midway could compel the remaining American carriers into a decisive battle. Admiral Yamamoto was determined to destroy those carriers. He knew Japan's industrial capacity could never match America's once U.S. shipyards began producing carriers in volume. Japan had to win the war in 1942 while it still held numerical and operational superiority. In Washington, however, the Navy's primary cryptanalysis center, OP-20G, disagreed with HYPO's assessment. Located in the Navy Department building, OP-20G was ostensibly the superior organization, with more personnel, better equipment, and proximity to the seat of naval command. But it lacked Station HYPO's specialized focus on the Pacific Theater and the team's cumulative experience with Japanese naval communications. Analysts in Washington speculated that AF might refer to the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, or perhaps a renewed offensive in the South Pacific, toward Port Moresby, Fiji, or Samoa. Some feared an attack on Hawaii itself, or even the U.S. West Coast. Without certainty on the target, Admiral Nimitz could not position his forces effectively. If he concentrated his carriers near Midway and the Japanese struck elsewhere, both his ships and the real target would be lost. Tensions between Station HYPO and OP-20G escalated through late May. OP-20G had recently been reorganized. Lawrence Safford, a brilliant cryptanalyst hailed as the father of Navy cryptology, had been replaced by Commander John Redmond, a communications officer with little experience in cryptanalysis. Redmond was competent in his previous field, but, as one evaluation noted, untrained in the nuanced work of code-breaking. He brought a communications officer's mindset to an analytical organization, emphasizing procedures and the chain of command over insight and intuition. The bureaucratic struggle between HYPO and OP-20G was about more than the target. It was about control of naval intelligence. Rochefort reported directly to Nimitz's intelligence officer, Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton, his longtime friend from their years studying Japanese in Tokyo. This direct communication allowed intelligence to reach the fleet commander without bureaucratic delay, but it infuriated Washington. Rochefort bypassed the established chain of command, delivering analysis directly to the commander instead of routing it through OP-20G for validation. From Washington's perspective, this violated procedure and undermined central control. From Rochefort's viewpoint, war did not wait for bureaucracy. Admiral Nimitz needed intelligence immediately, not after review and delays through multiple layers of command. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, trusted his Washington staff more than the informal Hawaii arrangement. King was a brilliant but difficult man, known for his abrasive personality and strict insistence on proper procedure. He disliked Rochefort, seeing him as insubordinate and overconfident. Commander Redmond likewise resented Rochefort's independence, insisting that all intelligence analysis be centralized in Washington. Yet the stakes were far higher than bureaucratic rivalry. Lives hung in the balance. With only 3 carriers against Japan's fleet, America could not afford error. Another Pearl Harbor-level disaster would leave Hawaii and the West Coast perilously exposed. It was Captain Wilfred J. Jasper Holmes, a submariner turned intelligence officer on HYPO's staff, who conceived the brilliant plan that would resolve the AF mystery. Holmes suggested that Midway transmit an unencrypted message reporting that its water desalination plant had broken down, and the base was running short of fresh water. If the Japanese intercepted it and subsequently reported that AF was low on water, HYPO would have definitive proof that AF referred to Midway. The ruse was elegantly simple. Japanese intelligence monitored American communications just as HYPO monitored theirs. An unencrypted emergency about water shortages would seem entirely plausible. Equipment failure in tropical climates was common. Rochefort immediately recognized the brilliance of Holmes's plan and presented it to Edwin Layton, who took it to Admiral Nimitz. Nimitz, a commander willing to trust his intelligence officers and take calculated risks, approved the plan without hesitation. Midway's garrison received instructions via secure submarine cable. a method impervious to Japanese interception, to broadcast a plain-language emergency request for water supplies. Between May 19 and 21, 1942, the message went out. Within 2 days, Station HYPO intercepted a Japanese intelligence report. Partially decrypted in JN-25, it confirmed that AF was experiencing water shortages. The proof was irrefutable. AF meant Midway. The Japanese were en route, yet Washington remained skeptical. OP-20G predicted a mid-June attack, while HYPO anticipated late May or early June, based on date indicators in Japanese messages. The date-time groups were super-enciphered, layered atop standard JN-25 encryption, and notoriously difficult to decrypt. OP-20G had not cracked them. Station HYPO had, thanks to a breakthrough by Lieutenant Joseph Finnegan. Working under Dyer's supervision, Finnegan discovered the Japanese method for encrypting date-time groups, a separate system requiring additional mathematical analysis. Edwin Layton, in his memoir And I Was There, credited Finnegan with this critical discovery. This breakthrough allowed HYPO to determine not just where, but precisely when the Japanese would strike. On May 26th, they intercepted orders for 2 destroyer groups escorting invasion transports and successfully decrypted the date-time data using Finnegan's method, revealing the planned attack for June 4 or 5, 1942. The level of precision achieved was extraordinary. Admiral Nimitz now knew not only where to position his forces but also when the enemy was expected to arrive. Analysts in Washington questioned whether Rochefort was overconfident, seeing certainty in partial messages and allowing his assertiveness to outweigh caution. Admiral King remained skeptical. If Rochefort's assessment proved wrong, the consequences would be catastrophic. He could be blamed for endangering the Pacific Fleet by relying on flawed intelligence, ending his career and costing American lives. Yet Rochefort trusted his conclusions. His team had been working 18 to 24-hour shifts for weeks, fueled by coffee, cigarettes, and occasional sandwiches delivered to the basement. The evidence was compelling. The volume of communications, the units involved, logistical preparations, date markers, and Midway's water report all converged on a single conclusion. Japan's next major operation would strike Midway in early June, supported by 4 carriers. By May 27, 1942, Rochefort's team had decrypted enough information to provide Nimitz with nearly the entire Japanese order of battle. The Japanese force included 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, the same experienced units that had attacked Pearl Harbor. They would be supported by 2 battleships, including Yamamoto's flagship, Yamato, the largest and most powerful battleship ever built, along with 2 heavy cruisers, 1 light cruiser, and a dozen destroyers. Approximately 250 carrier aircraft, piloted by seasoned aviators, were included, along with an invasion force of 5,000 troops scheduled to land on Midway on June 7th. This intelligence was so comprehensive that Nimitz's staff could anticipate the Japanese approach, the timing of initial airstrikes, and even the organization of attack formations. During the Pacific Fleet Staff Conference on May 27th, Rochefort and Layton presented their findings to Nimitz. The room, crowded with skeptical officers, listened as Rochefort, still in his bathrobe, explained the process, displayed partially decrypted messages, and demonstrated how the analysis had produced such detailed predictions. No naval force in history had ever possessed such complete pre-battle operational intelligence. Station HYPO's breakthroughs against JN-25, combined with the Japanese overconfidence in their codes, created an unparalleled intelligence advantage. Nimitz now had insights that even some of Yamamoto's subordinates lacked. But intelligence alone could not win a battle. Nimitz faced a daunting operational challenge. He commanded 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the badly damaged Yorktown. Yorktown had been severely impaired at the Battle of the Coral Sea, initially requiring an estimated 3 months of repairs at Puget Sound. Structural damage to the flight deck, destroyed fuel systems, and fires that had killed dozens left her unfit for normal operations. Yet Nimitz made a daring decision. He instructed repair crews to make Yorktown operational in just 3 days, not fully restored, but functional enough to launch and recover aircraft. The crews, initially incredulous, began a near-miraculous round-the-clock effort. Yorktown entered dry dock at 11:30 a.m. on May 28th, where over 1,400 workers swarmed the vessel. Welders reinforced the flight deck, electricians restored critical systems, and damage control teams patched the hull. Temporary fixes sufficed for one final engagement. On the morning of May 30th, Yorktown sailed to join Enterprise and Hornet, a staggering 48 to 72 hours of repair condensed into 3 calendar days. Against Japan's 4 experienced carriers and veteran pilots, Nimitz now could field 3 American carriers, albeit with less experienced airmen. Japanese naval aviators had trained for years and had extensive combat experience, while many American pilots were green, with only rudimentary carrier training. The disparity was stark, but Nimitz possessed a decisive advantage: perfect intelligence. He positioned his carriers at a point they named Point Luck, 350 miles northeast of Midway, perfectly set to ambush the Japanese after the first strikes on Midway's airfields. The Japanese, confident in their surprise, anticipated an undefended target, planning to rearm aircraft after initial attacks and then hunt American carriers they assumed were far away. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, leading the Japanese strike force, expected hours of uncontested operations. The presence of 3 American carriers northeast of Midway never occurred to him. Japanese intelligence had falsely reported Yorktown sunk and Enterprise and Hornet thousands of miles from the battle area. Nimitz's audacious gamble was immense. If Rashford's analysis had been wrong, the Pacific Fleet could have been annihilated, leaving Hawaii exposed. If the Japanese struck elsewhere, both the carriers and the intended target would be lost. But if the intelligence proved accurate, America would have the chance to confront the Japanese on favorable terms. On June 3, 1942, Navy patrol planes spotted the Japanese fleet approaching Midway from the northwest, exactly as Rashford had predicted. PBY Catalina flying boats, operating at the limit of their range, located the invasion transports first, then the carriers. Each report confirmed Station HYPO's analysis. The location, timing, and force composition all aligned. Nimitz's trap was set. At dawn on June 4th, 108th Japanese aircraft launched from 4 carriers toward Midway: 36 ID-3A dive bombers, 36 Nakajima B-5N torpedo bombers armed for land targets, and 36 Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters. Midway's radar detected them 93 miles out at 0545 hours. American defenders scrambled every available aircraft to intercept, but the Japanese strike overwhelmed them. Marine Corps pilots flying outdated F-2A Buffaloes suffered heavy losses. Ground fire damaged some enemy aircraft, but the initial assault largely achieved its objectives. While Midway's runways were damaged, they remained operational, and not all defending aircraft had been destroyed. The first major shock arrived when American aircraft from Midway launched attacks on the Japanese carriers. Marine Corps dive bombers, Army Air Force B-17s, and Navy torpedo planes assaulted the Japanese fleet, suffering heavy losses without scoring hits. Yet their actions forced the Japanese to keep combat air patrols engaged, disrupted enemy operations, and demonstrated that American forces were more capable and resolute than Japanese intelligence had anticipated. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo faced a critical decision. Returning aircraft were low on fuel and needed to land. After assessing the situation, he concluded a second strike on Midway would be necessary to fully neutralize the base. Following standard procedure, he ordered reserve aircraft rearmed with land attack bombs. Ordnance crews began replacing torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs on the flight decks with high-explosive bombs intended for land targets. Then, at 7:28 a.m., everything shifted. A Japanese scout, delayed by a catapult malfunction, reported sighting 10 American surface vessels to the northeast. The initial report did not specify ship types, but the mere presence of American ships was unexpected. Nagumo immediately confronted the possibility of enemy carriers in the vicinity, a scenario he had believed impossible. Yorktown had been presumed sunk, and Enterprise and Hornet were supposed to be far from Midway. Nagumo halted the rearming process and ordered aircraft switched back to anti-ship ordnance. Ordnance crews scrambled to remove land attack bombs and retrieve torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs from below decks. The flight decks and hangars of all 4 Japanese carriers became scenes of tense, controlled chaos. Fully fueled planes surrounded by loose bombs and torpedoes created a volatile environment as aviation fuel fumes thickened the air. At 10:22 a.m., American dive bombers appeared overhead. 3 squadrons of Douglas SBD Dauntless from Enterprise and Yorktown, separated from their escort fighters and torpedo planes, found the Japanese carriers at the precise moment of maximum vulnerability. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, leading Enterprise's air group, had extended the search beyond expected points, risking fuel reserves, and his gamble paid off when he spotted the wake of a Japanese destroyer. The Japanese carriers were crowded with armed, fueled aircraft, their combat air patrol at sea level after repelling torpedo bomber attacks. The 41 American torpedo bombers had launched with extraordinary bravery, yet 35 were shot down, and not one torpedo hit its target. Their sacrifice drew Japanese fighters to low altitude, disrupting defensive coordination. From 14,000 feet, Dauntless pilots dived at speeds approaching 250 knots. In roughly 6 minutes of perfectly coordinated strikes, they obliterated 3 Japanese carriers. Bombs tore through the flight decks, igniting secondary explosions among fueled and armed aircraft, spreading fires uncontrollably. Akagi burned out of control. Kaga was devastated, and Soryu succumbed after catastrophic hits. Hiryu, separated earlier in the day, escaped the initial attack, launching strikes that severely damaged Yorktown. Later that afternoon, American dive bombers found Hiryu and left her burning as well. By evening on June 4th, all 4 Japanese fleet carriers were either sunk or abandoned. Japan lost 3,587 men, including elite pilots and maintenance crews. The United States lost Yorktown to submarine torpedoes 2 days later. American casualties totaled 362. In 6 minutes of precise dive bombing, the Pacific War was irrevocably changed. Japan, which had begun with overwhelming carrier strength, had lost 4 of 6 fleet carriers, and its industrial capacity could not replace them. Meanwhile, the United States, with a massive industrial base, was commissioning new, more capable Essex-class carriers. Japan would never again conduct offensive operations, forced into a defensive posture, while American industrial and naval power would gradually, inexorably wear her down. Rashford's intelligence work had made this transformation possible. By predicting Japanese operational procedures and identifying the critical moment to strike, his team's analysis of JN-25 messages enabled the decisive timing of the dive bomber attacks. Yet recognition for this achievement proved elusive. Bureaucratic conflict between Station HYPO and OP-20G in Washington intensified after Midway, with both claiming credit. Commander John Redman of OP-20G resented Rashford's independence, supported by his brother Rear Admiral Joseph Redmond and Chief of Naval Operations Ernest King, who favored centralized intelligence control. In October 1942, 4 months after Midway, Rashford was relieved of command at Station HYPO and reassigned to oversee a floating dry dock in San Francisco. Officially, the transfer was framed as necessary sea duty, but it was widely understood as punishment for defying bureaucracy. Rashford had been correct about Midway, his analysis enabling the greatest American naval victory of the war, yet he never returned to cryptanalysis, never commanded a ship at sea again, and retired in 1953 without due recognition. Despite this, Station HYPO's work continued under new leadership throughout 1942 and into 1943, supporting campaigns such as Guadalcanal and the island-hopping strategy across the Central Pacific. Intelligence from decrypted messages guided American ships in engagements, identified weak points, warned of Japanese reinforcements, and informed operational planning, ensuring that Rashford's legacy endured in every successful Pacific operation. The efforts of Station HYPO ultimately played a pivotal role in Operation Vengeance in April 1943, when American fighters intercepted and downed Admiral Yamamoto's aircraft using decrypted flight plans. Yamamoto was en route from Rabaul to Bougainville to inspect frontline units. Station HYPO intercepted and decoded messages detailing his complete itinerary, including departure time, flight path, and expected arrival. This intelligence was forwarded to President Roosevelt, who authorized the mission. 18 P-38 Lightning fighters took off from Guadalcanal, intercepted Yamamoto's plane precisely on schedule, and shot it down. The death of Yamamoto, the mastermind of Pearl Harbor and Japan's preeminent naval strategist, was a crushing blow to Japanese morale. Thomas Dyer remained at Station HYPO throughout the war, ultimately achieving the rank of captain. His contributions to cracking JN-25 and overseeing the critical breakthroughs that enabled Midway earned him recognition in cryptologic circles as the father of machine cryptanalysis. After the war, he became one of the 3 principal trainers for the Armed Forces Security Agency and later the National Security Agency, alongside William Friedman and Lambros Kalimajos. His methods for leveraging IBM machines in code-breaking influenced an entire generation of signals intelligence specialists. Edwin Layton, Nimitz's intelligence officer who had championed Rashford's analysis and presented it to Nimitz, served throughout the Pacific War and retired as a rear admiral. He spent decades advocating for Rashford's recognition. His memoir, And I Was There, published in 1985, chronicled Rashford's achievements and the injustices he endured. Joseph Finnegan, who deciphered the Japanese date-time groups, continued his cryptanalytic career and became a leading figure in post-war signals intelligence. His work had been crucial in determining the attack date, allowing Nimitz to position forces with precise timing. Without it, American carriers might have arrived too early, wasting fuel, or too late, missing the battle entirely. The linguists, traffic analysts, and cryptanalysts who had endured grueling hours in the Pearl Harbor basement went on to diverse careers. Most remained silent about their wartime efforts due to decades-long classification restrictions. The institutional knowledge of their accomplishments remained classified until the 1970s, more than 30 years after the war ended. Families were unaware of their fathers' and husbands' contributions, and neighbors often wondered why these men had remained in Hawaii rather than fighting overseas. The cryptanalysts carried their secrets quietly, unable to claim credit for achievements that had altered history. The full extent of American success against Japanese codes was not declassified until the mid-1970s, when the NSA began releasing historical World War II cryptanalysis documents. Only then could historians and the public grasp how thoroughly American cryptanalysts had penetrated Japanese communications and how crucial their intelligence was to major battles. In 1980, a campaign began to secure proper recognition for Rashford. Admiral Donald Max Showers, a former naval intelligence officer who later served at the CIA, led the effort, joined by Navy Secretary John Lehman, who understood both the historical significance and the injustice of Rashford's treatment. The campaign gained momentum as previously classified documents became accessible, revealing the full story of Station HYPO's achievements. On May 30, 1986, almost exactly 44 years after Midway, President Ronald Reagan posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Medal to Joseph Rochefort. Rashford had passed away on July 20, 1976, never knowing he would receive the honor. His children accepted the medal at a White House ceremony. The citation praised his sustained superior performance and highlighted how his intelligence work had contributed decisively to the United States' victory at Midway. It was a modest description of one of the most important intelligence accomplishments in American military history. Rashford's success stemmed from his rare combination of skills: mathematical aptitude for code breaking, linguistic and cultural knowledge of Japan gained from 3 years of study in Tokyo, 1929-1932, intelligence analysis, expertise, and leadership that encouraged collaborative innovation. His willingness to bypass bureaucratic channels to deliver intelligence directly to commanders demonstrated moral courage. His insistence on accuracy under pressure from Washington revealed intellectual integrity. By fostering an environment where junior officers could contribute fully regardless of rank, he demonstrated enlightened leadership. He understood that breaking JN-25 required every team member working at peak capacity, sharing insights, questioning assumptions, and synthesizing fragments into actionable intelligence. Thomas Dyer's dedication, including enduring extended shifts with only pharmaceutical support, went far beyond reasonable expectations. The entire Station HYPO team demonstrated that seemingly impossible challenges could be overcome through collaboration, innovation, and relentless effort. They recognized that their work mattered more than personal comfort, rest, or health. The men defending Midway, pilots flying into combat, sailors manning stations, depended entirely on the precision of Station HYPO's intelligence. The technical achievement was extraordinary. Cracking JN-25 required not only mathematical skill but also intuition, pattern recognition, and the ability to anticipate the enemy's thinking. IBM punch card machines aided in sorting and searching, but the breakthroughs came from human ingenuity applied to complex problems. The scope of the task was immense, roughly 30,000 to 33,000 code groups in active use, with each message containing millions of potential interpretations. Successful analysis demanded years of accumulated expertise, educated guesses verified against other messages, and the synthesis of partial information into actionable intelligence. There were no modern computers, automated analytical tools, or machine learning algorithms, only pencils, paper, punch cards, and human minds operating at the absolute limits of capability. Cryptanalysts understood that every hour counted, and that the next intercepted message might contain intelligence capable of saving thousands of lives. The strategic impact went far beyond Midway. Rashford's work demonstrated that signals intelligence could provide a decisive advantage in modern warfare, showing that even the most daunting analytical tasks could change the course of history. It proved to military leaders that acting on intelligence assessments, even when they contradicted conventional wisdom, could enable victories otherwise impossible. The transformation of the Pacific War initiated at Midway produced ripple effects that shaped the world for decades. Japan's defeat led to American occupation and the transformation of Japan into a democratic ally. Pacific island chains became strategic positions. During the Cold War, carrier aviation tactics developed. During the Pacific War would dominate naval operations for the next 80 years. The cryptanalysis techniques pioneered at Station HYPO evolved into the vast signals intelligence infrastructure of the NSA. Lessons from breaking JN-25 influenced American approaches to signals intelligence throughout the Cold War and beyond. Integrating code breaking, traffic analysis, and operational intelligence became standard practice. Using IBM machines and later computers revolutionized cryptanalysis. Commanders learned that signals intelligence required not only technical skill, but also cultural knowledge and operational expertise, shaping how intelligence agencies recruited and trained personnel. In 1985, surviving members of Station HYPO and other Pacific War cryptanalysts reunited to commemorate their contributions. Men in their 60s and 70s reunited to reflect on their younger selves, laboring through impossible hours in that basement dungeon, racing against time to provide their forces any potential advantage. They shared accounts of the dive bomber strikes that obliterated 3 Japanese carriers within minutes, of the water ruse that confirmed AF meant Midway, of grueling shifts fueled by coffee and benzodrine, of Rochefort working in his bathrobe because the heat rendered uniforms unbearable. Some shed tears recalling colleagues who had not survived the war. Others marveled at what they had accomplished using such rudimentary tools. Every attendee recognized that they had been part of something extraordinary, their work having a tangible effect on history. The reunion offered the first opportunity for many to speak freely about their wartime experiences, recounting stories that classification had hidden for more than 40 years. Edwin Layton, then in his 80s, reflected on the team's achievements. He remembered Rochefort's unwavering confidence when presenting intelligence to Nimitz on May 27, 1942, at the Pacific Fleet Staff Conference, staking his career on the analysis, and showing moral courage by insisting on the truth despite Washington's skepticism. He recalled that day vividly, when Rochefort finally informed Nimitz precisely where and when the Japanese would strike. The accuracy of that intelligence was astounding. American carriers were positioned exactly where they needed to be, and the Japanese sailed into a meticulously prepared ambush. None of it would have been possible without men like Rochefort, who refused to surrender to the problem's difficulty, persevered when others would have quit, and believed that intelligence and analysis could alter the course of history. The reunion closed with a statement that captured the essence of Station HYPO's work. One veteran cryptanalyst spoke for many. "We came to this war as mathematicians, linguists, engineers, puzzle solvers. We left as the people who changed history, not through violence but through understanding, not through force but through intelligence. We read the enemy's mind, saving thousands of lives and shortening a brutal war. Some of us were acknowledged, many were not." Joseph Rochefort devoted his career to doing what was right rather than politically expedient. Thomas Dyer endured exhaustion on extended shifts powered by benzodrine. Every person in that basement gave everything because they understood the stakes. We proved that knowledge is power, that comprehending your adversary can defeat him as surely as superior weaponry, that a small, determined, skilled group can achieve what seems impossible. The Japanese codes appeared unbreakable. Roughly 30,000 to 33,000 super-enciphered groups, constantly changing. Yet they were cracked, not through luck, but through intelligence, determination, and relentless effort. The Battle of Midway was won by pilots flying into overwhelming anti-aircraft fire, by mechanics readying aircraft under impossible conditions, by commanders making daring decisions, by sailors performing damage control as their ships sank. But it was made possible by intelligence, the Codebreakers who delivered Admiral Nimitz the certainty he needed on May 27, 1942. To the memory of Joseph Rochefort, born May 12, 1900, who passed before receiving the recognition awarded posthumously on May 30, 1986. To Thomas Dyer and every cryptanalyst who sacrificed rest, health, and sometimes sanity to decipher enemy messages. To the linguists translating the findings, to traffic analysts detecting patterns in chaos, to intercept operators capturing the signals, and to everyone in that basement who kept their work secret for decades. You changed history. You saved lives. You demonstrated that intelligence in all its forms, both information and wisdom, can be the most decisive weapon of war. Breaking JN-25 required not just skill but vision, mathematics, linguistics, cultural insight, intuition, and analytical rigor combined into actionable intelligence. Leaders had to trust analysts even when their conclusions defied expectations. Teams functioned collaboratively, subordinating ego to mission. That relentless effort enabled 6 minutes of dive bombing to destroy 3 Japanese carriers, made possible by 6 months of tireless cryptanalysis. Rochefort believed it could be done. Dyer worked grueling extended shifts. Together, a team of analysts refused to accept the problem as unsolvable, and Nimitz placed everything on their intelligence. The Pacific War was won multiple times over 4 years, but decisively on June 4, 1942, when American dive bombers struck Japanese carriers at the moment of peak vulnerability. That was not luck, it was intelligence. That is the power of understanding your adversary, persevering through impossible challenges, and assembling teams of brilliant minds given the freedom and resources to work. The lesson of Midway is simple yet profound. Knowledge is power. Insight is victory. Intelligence can reshape the world. By proving this, they helped save civilization from tyranny. After decades of silence, recognition finally arrived. The transformation from unknown cryptanalysts to acknowledged heroes took 40 years, but the achievement itself was timeless. Victory at Midway was achieved on many fronts. On carrier decks, in dive bomber cockpits, in damage control parties, in command decisions, but it was made possible in a basement at Pearl Harbor, where codebreakers and linguists turned the impossible into the inevitable. 5-digit number groups became keys to Japanese intentions. Exhausted men worked tirelessly because failure meant catastrophe. Innovation, collaboration, and determination turned the unsolvable into the achievable. Joseph Rochefort died in 1976 in Torrance, California, aged 76, before receiving his medal, before the story could be fully told. His legacy endures in the intelligence community he shaped, the methods he pioneered, and the proof that understanding your enemy can be the ultimate weapon. The codebreaker who read Japanese minds, the officer in a bathrobe in a basement who won the Pacific War, the mathematician who proved knowledge is power, that was Joseph Rochefort. That was Station HYPO. That was how America learned to read every Japanese message and, in doing so, won a war that had once seemed unwinnable. The story of JN-25 and the cryptanalyst who conquered it stands as one of history's greatest intelligence triumphs. It demonstrates that wars are won not only by force of arms, but by force of mind, that the most potent weapons may be formulas, linguistic expertise, and the will to surpass human limits. A small, dedicated group in a basement can change history as surely as entire armies. June 4, 1942, altered the Pacific War. But the true transformation began in the patient work of cryptanalysts who refused to surrender, who endured extreme conditions, and who proved that intelligence can be as decisive as aircraft carriers. They understood that mastering the enemy's mind is the first step to defeating him. They were mathematicians, linguists, sailors, marines, and officers. They were the codebreakers who gave America the intelligence that won the Pacific War. The Pacific War.